Creating a video game is never an easy thing, I know that. But you'd think within that realm one of the easier things to do would be to make a game based on a famous action franchise. You already have all the characters and settings, and if you want to follow the movie's plot, you even have the story set up for you. In theory, that should mean that the developers can put all their focus on the gameplay, right? But it rarely works out like that, does it? Look at the Terminator, for instance. That's a franchise that's practically made for a video game adaptation. But yet, even though they made dozens of Terminator games, I can only think of like 2 of them that's worth playing. And if you think that's bad, other action franchises have it even worse. I mean, the less said about the Rambo games, the better, right? But there is one particular English sleazeball who has a surprisingly clean gaming track record. After the release of this one certain game back in '98, almost every Bond game up until the mid-2000s were actually surprisingly fun. And with all that lovely AAA goodness to choose from, it's easy to see why this average-looking black and white Game Boy game has been largely forgotten today. However, don't let the inferior hardware, the generic name and the obviously lower budget fool you. This is without a doubt one of the greatest Bond games ever made. Being a Game Boy game, this obviously isn't a first-person shooter like the other Bond games at the time. The only first-person shooter I know of on the Game Boy is Faceball 2000, and believe me when I say you would not want this to play like that. What we do get is a sort of modern-day action RPG, kind of like a Zelda game with guns, albeit not quite as amazing as that phrase makes it sound. The goal of the game is to stop an international arms ring led by a megalomaniac Soviet general. It's such a typical Bond plot that it's almost a parody, but I suppose it's as good a reason as any to travel the world, use cool gadgets and spend thousands of dollars on casino games, and all at the expense of the British taxpayers, of course. Stereotypical as it may be, the story is actually pretty fun to follow though. The dialogue is well written with a fun sense of humor, and since the game was made during the Brosnan Bond era, there's amazing cheesy lines and wonderful puns everywhere. If you prefer the more serious modern Bond movies, you may consider this bad news, but if you're like me and think that the Bond franchise gets better the cheesier it gets, then I think you'll enjoy it. Like I said before, the gameplay is pretty much like a 2D Zelda game. Specifically, it plays like Link's Awakening, so everything from the basic controls down to assigning different items to the A and B buttons will be familiar to you if you've played that game. And let's face it, if you haven't played Link's Awakening, then you're a bad Game Boy owner. With that said though, Bond is by no means a complete clone of the Zelda games. For starters, the combat has a much bigger focus on ranged weapons compared to the close-range focused Zelda games. Sure, you start the game with only your fancy British martial arts, but soon you'll get a handgun and a machine gun and even a rocket launcher. The enemies get the same kind of weapons though, so blocking and dodging becomes very important, especially in the later parts of the game. And luckily there are items like shields and bulletproof vests that help with this. Now while 007 is fairly action heavy, the combat is by no means all there is to the game. There's actually a decent amount of puzzle solving as well. Unlike the Zelda games in which the puzzles usually focus on using the items that you have to manipulate the environment, the puzzles of 007 have more in common with the puzzles of classic point-and-click adventure games. You usually simply need to use the right item at the right place, but there are times when you need to get a bit more creative, such as when you need to shoot out a light bulb in order to make a room dark enough so you can sneak past a guard, or like my favorite part of the game where you go on a big scavenger hunt through the city of Marrakesh, which includes both belly-button jewelry theft and black market cat trading. But no matter what bizarre things may happen, the game manages to make it fit into the Bond franchise, at least the stupidest parts of the Bond franchise. Sure, the graphics are simple and they were outdated even back in '98, but the game does have a very charming style, and everything from the goofy little Bond sprite with its hand in its pockets, to the giant hammers and sickles on the floor of the Russian level, really feels right at home with the style of the Bond moves at the time. The music also fits greatly into the Bond universe. You get several different flavors of the classic Bond theme, as well as some very memorable original music. The only thing missing is a psychedelic 60s music video. The bosses also help to cement the James Bond feeling. You of course get the obligatory femme fatale assassin, who later becomes the equally obligatory Bond girl, and you also get cameos from fan favorites Oddjob and Jaws. And then we have Saddam Hussein. Okay, so the game never actually says that it's supposed to be him, but he's a mustachioed Middle Eastern warlord named Saddam, and he spends an entire level bombing an innocent village. And when you shoot him just once with any weapon, he starts to literally wave a white flag and beg for mercy. So yeah, sorry, but you're not fooling anyone here, game. It should be fairly obvious by now that I really like this game, but I suppose I should mention at least something negative about it. Well, the one thing that sticks out is the difficulty, or rather the lack thereof. The enemies themselves are actually decently challenging. The problem is that you get so many healing items that you still never feel like you're in any real danger, and even if you do get killed, you rarely lose more than a couple of minutes of progress. This is nothing but a small nitpick though. I still highly recommend this game, especially to those of you who have already played the more famous Game Boy classics to death. It's a bit outdated, a bit silly, and really fun. In other words, the perfect James Bond game.